Yeah.
All right, so we had 11:45. I'd like to introduce our two speakers and in holding with our theme this semester, we have two graduates from the Center for Wetlands. And I will read through their bios, a little bit lengthy, but two. So anyway, Stacy Greco, who's in this corner, currently serves as the Water Resources Program Manager with the Alachua County Environmental Protection Department. She has worked to protect our water resources for the past 20 years. She received her BS in Environmental Sciences from Warren Wilson College in Asheville, North Carolina, and her master's in environment. I actually claim her as my first master's graduate student. Let's see, and in 2010, she received a graduate certificate in social marketing from the University of South Florida to learn how to apply traditional marketing tools to change behaviors for protecting our water. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that. And then Eliana Barty, over in this corner, or side of the room, I guess, is a senior planner in the Water Resources Program with more than 20 years of experience researching, evaluating, and implementing programs to protect natural resources. She first joined the Alachua County Environmental Protection Division in 2006. In her current role, Eliana implements regulatory and outreach water conservation programs throughout the county. She received a BA in economics and an MS in environmental engineering sciences from the University of Florida with Dr. Mark Brown, who's sometimes here. So with that, I will turn it over to you two, whoever wants to go first.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Lots of good memories here. So I'll kick us off, and then Eliana is going to talk about water conservation, and then I'll talk about water quality. Yeah, is there a clicker? Or I can just do this.
Mouse, or I think keyboard.
We'll see if this works. So a little bit about our department. We are local government here in Alachua County, really unique for a county our size to have a dedicated environmental protection department. Normally people are like us are shoved in with public works or a planning department. So it really reflects the environmental ethic of our community. So we have a whole land conservation program that tries to get land into conservation easement or outright purchase so that it won't get developed, and it can be helping with recharge and cleaning up our water. Our natural resources group, they deal with development review. So as land gets developed, they make sure that it's happening in a way that is consistent with all of our codes and our regulations. Our petroleum group, they basically are funded by the state looking at underground storage tanks. So where are we getting leaks from gas stations and things like that. Hazardous materials, anytime there's an accident on I-75, which happens a lot, they go out, make sure gasoline isn't getting spilled into the stormwater or into even like impacting our groundwater. They inspect all of the hazardous materials facilities. So think pools or stores that are storing chemicals for pools, and our landscaping companies with fertilizers, all of that type of stuff. And then last but not least, water resources. And we deal with water conservation, water quality, stormwater, and basically our leadership team, all of us are Gators, with most of us coming from Center for Wetlands Environmental Engineering. Shane Williams is our stormwater engineer, and he does water quality improvement projects. He'd be a great person to tap for a future talk. Greg Owen, he leads our water quality, probably out in the field today collecting samples. He's got some great research. He just did a lot of stuff up at Hornsby Springs with Dr. Matt Cohen. And Eliana, you'll hear all about what she does actually right now. So I'll let her take over.
I'm on. So nice to be here. Thanks everybody for inviting us. I deal with water conservation and water supply issues, and groundwater depletion is something that is happening nationwide. So the New York Times published this article, I think late last year, and it's really a good in-depth analysis of what our groundwater supplies are looking like. We are pumping our groundwater at a faster rate than ever before nationwide, and there's really no plan B. There's no alternative water source that we can turn to once those aquifers are depleted. And then when we look a little bit closer to home, the entire state of Florida is almost the entire state of Florida is within water resource caution areas, which are those areas that are currently experiencing critical water supply issues or are projected to experience those issues within the next 20 years. So close horizon. And they impact more than 80% of the Florida's population. And then right into our backyard, from a regional context, the minimum flows and levels for the lower Santa Fe and Ichthacne rivers show that both systems are in recovery, which means there's not enough water to maintain healthy rivers and springs and to supply our current groundwater demand, let alone groundwater growth and our projected growth in the state and in the region. So not a pretty picture overall in terms of our groundwater supply, but the silver lining is that this designation is now requiring the water management districts and DEP to work on prevention and recovery plans. And that, that's looking for projects to recharge the aquifer, maybe hopefully turning more towards water conservation, because in our view, that is kind of like the cheapest and easiest way to find this extra water that is very much needed. So where does our groundwater go? In Alachua County, public supply represents the largest water use, and that is the meter water that utilities deliver to our front doors, pretty much. And we have very good data on public supply. Our utilities know exactly how much they're pumping from the aquifer, and we as users know exactly how much we're using every month because we get a bill. On the other hand, the next two uses are agriculture and domestic wells, and they're in red because we don't actually have very good data on those. Wells are typically not metered, and there's not a lot of monitoring going on, so all of that water use data is based on a lot of assumptions. And then when we look at the public supply side of things, and specifically at residential water use, we know that in Alachua County, outdoor water use accounts for close to 60% of a household water use, if there is an irrigation system present. And this pretty much carries statewide. So it's a big issue, and a lot of our focus is on this outdoor water conservation, because as a local government, we're preempted from looking at other uses such as ag. Now, this graph was created by Dr. Nick Taylor with the program for resource efficient communities, and it shows the average daily water use in 2021 grouped by the year the house was built. So on the left-hand side, you have older homes, the 1920s homes. They use way less than 150 gallons per day. All the way to about the 1990s, that value hovers around 150. But then we see in the blue columns, water use starts creeping up from the 1995s up to more recent construction to close to 400 gallons a day on average. And that increase coincides almost perfectly with the orange line, which represents the percent of new construction that comes in an in-ground irrigation system. So every time we show this chart, I'm like, this is interesting, right? We would expect those newer homes to be more efficient and use a lot less water than the older homes with the new appliances and fixtures. But that's not actually what we're seeing in the data. And again, this is like a trend that is occurring statewide and will likely impact our water supply planning if we don't reverse that course. So just to give you a perspective of how much water an irrigation system uses, every time on the average lot size, every time you run a cycle of irrigation water per cycle, it's equivalent to almost an 8-hour shower. So I'm sure we've all known, like, hey, keep your showers to 5 minutes or less to conserve water. But as you can see, any efforts that we do indoors are easily negated if we just run our irrigation system once a week. And I love to show this infographic, which came from the same publication from Dr. Taylor, because I don't work in inches. So if you tell me irrigate half an inch, it doesn't make any sense to me. Even if you tell me, oh, you're using 1,000 gallons, it's really hard. And I work in this business. It's really hard to relate it to me. So when we talk to our homeowners, it's important to translate science and data in a way that they can easily understand. And so when we would go into a high water user homeowner, we can say, hey, if you run your cycle once a week, it's like flushing your toilet 774 times. And it's something that they can really understand and grasp. So how many of you, raise your hand if you get your water from a utility? And if you check your bill almost every month and you kind of have a good idea of how much water you use. That's great. So it's really, really easy for us to get a utility bill to know how much water we're using. And when I first joined the water conservation group and started kind of digging into the issues, I had two main questions, and those were, so where are we as a county? Like, how much water are average households using? And where do we want to be? Like, what is a reasonable, if I talk to a high water user, because that's what we call them, what should I tell them to shoot for? What's the goal? So when we look at data across the state, for those indoor water uses, the one we really can't get away from, bathing, cooking, showering, we're hovering around 150 gallons per day as a typical average household water use. So that lands us, with some grace in the 4,000 to 6,000 gallons a month. And obviously, if your household is a household of one, you may be at 1,000 gallons. So it's like really the people dependent. Everything else is really assumed to be going outdoors. So this is a great screenshot of the H2O Save tool, which is a mapping tool created by the Program for Resource Efficient Communities. And basically they partner with utilities throughout the state and they import parcel level water use data. And this is showing the GRU water customers. The lighter shades are the lower water users. So the yellows and the oranges, they go to about 4,000 gallons per month. The darker shades, and as you notice, they're on the west side of the county, west of I-75, where we're seeing a lot of our new growth. Those are the higher water use, and they can go, up to 20, 50,000 gallons per month. So when I look at zooming in onto one of our more recent neighborhoods, you can see that 150 range or even the 400 range that was shown on that graph. Now we're sitting at over 500 gallons per month. And I'm sorry that is hidden, but I just wanted to point to that, like the biggest user in the neighborhood, we're looking at a use of 1,700 gallons per day, and they're hovering around 50,000 gallons a month, just on their small lot. So that's a lot of water, and we use this tool on a daily basis to inform our programs and help us direct and focus our efforts. In Alachua County, we do a lot of education that's using a lot of social media marketing, but also we still do face-to-face and table and events and so forth. We provide incentives to the high water users in the form of irrigation tune-ups and rebates to fix it and repair their leaks and problems. And then we do implement our regulatory tools that include irrigation restrictions. We have a design code for irrigation systems and the homeowner association's forest-friendly landscaping code. And I'll go over each of those. This is just an example of some of our social media marketing, just to show you with a small budget, we can reach quite a few numbers of residents, and we do target those by zip code to those high water use neighborhoods. We focus on maintenance of irrigation systems. These are not something that you can like put in the ground and forget about it. You have to constantly maintain, and also focus on turning the system off and only turning it on when it's needed, which is really a handful of times of the year, if any. Once the landscape is established. And Stacy will go over everything we do about social marketing, how we develop and test our campaigns, and how we regularly measure their effectiveness. So I won't really go into any details here. For incentives, we offer this service, which is visiting properties and running their irrigation systems and finding out if there's any issues. So based on 42 recent visits, you can see we find a ton of issues every time, like 126 leaks in 42 systems. And we adjust the irrigation timers. Sometimes people are watering an hour 5 times a day because they don't realize they have different programs running. So when we analyze the effectiveness of these programs, we did see that in this effort, we were able to save 176 gallons per house per day just by visiting the property and making changes. This doesn't even include repairs or replacement of rainfall shut-off devices. So it's a huge amount of savings. It is staff intensive, but we do pair this service with the rebate. So if we find major issues that require, investment or upgrades to more efficient components, we can offer a 50% rebate to cover those costs. Irrigation restrictions are those limits on which days of the weeks and at what times somebody can water. And we do enforce those locally. We focus again on those high water neighborhoods. And at those times of the years, like coming up in about 2 weeks, they're supposed to reset their timers from twice a week to once a week. We'll be doing some drive-bys to make sure that people are aware that, you know, they need to go to once a week. UF did analyze the effectiveness of enforcement, and they showed significant water savings for up to 1 year after somebody received the notice. So unfortunately, it's not just something we can do once and be done with. It's a program that we have to keep up with. And we would love to go to once a week restrictions year round. That's currently preempted in our county. But by our calculations, that would save about 40% of the outdoor water use, which is a pretty big chunk. So Alachua County is one of the few counties that has an irrigation design code. And if you're not aware, irrigation installation is not a licensed profession. So it's not like your plumber inside the house has to be a certified and licensed plumber. Anybody can install an irrigation system. So by having our own design code and inspecting the new systems that go in every day, we want to ensure that they meet some minimum standards, they're efficient, and that the property owner, you know, inherits a functioning system. This code has been in effect since 2016, and in 2022, we started talking about like making some revisions, and we asked UF to analyze the effectiveness of the previous code. Well, they found no savings compared to when we put the code in place in 2016 to previous systems pre-2016, which was a little bit disappointing, except when the irrigated area was reduced. So we took that and we ran with it and we said, well, irrigated area. So the new code that just went into effect limits permanent irrigation to 50% of the permeable area of a lot. And that accomplishes a couple of things. It shrinks that irrigated area. So obviously we're hoping to see some water savings, but also every day we have conversations with builders and installers that are trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do with the other 50%? And kind of shifting this landscaping paradigm from relying to, you know, onto a button to now using more temporary solutions and maybe even going back to that hose and sprinkler for, you know, a month or so. And we're having some really good conversations as people get used to this change. And then I also wanted to mention the Florida Friendly Landscaping Code. We adopted it into a local code in 2019. It mirrors a state statute that basically says that HOAs cannot prohibit homeowners from implementing Florida Friendly landscaping. And that, you know, that's following the principles of right plant, right place, and fertilize appropriately, or limit irrigation. In our code, we also said that deed restriction and covenants cannot require a permanent irrigation systems. If we look back in the history, in some subdivisions, those were just required and you couldn't get away with that. And we do check new developments of HOAs to make sure they have the correct or the appropriate language in their landscaping and irrigation sections so that hopefully we're avoiding issues in the future. But I wanted to point some of these pictures on the page. The one on the bottom left is a house in a newer subdivision where the average for the subdivision is about 17 to 20,000 gallons per month. But these homeowners were really into Florida Friendly. They decided to install Bahia instead of St. Augustine in the front yard, a lot more native and Florida Friendly beds. And they managed to keep their household water use to less than 4,000 a month. On the right-hand side, these two pictures are from the same subdivision. And like for years, builders and developers would tell us, we can't help it. Homeowners, they want that turf in the front yard. We have to give it to them, right? And then here came a developer that just decided to not put an inch of turf in the front yard, nor in the right of way. These are all planted beds, just out of her own will, I guess. And I've been tracking the water use in that neighborhood to see what's happening. And as you can see, it's much lower than comparable neighborhoods that have a more traditional landscape. So what I'm trying to say is that this is achievable. We're not asking to do something that's impossible. And it's just kind of trying to find the right tools to get us there. And I have one last slide on water utility pricing, because sometimes you hear like, oh, well, water is too cheap. People would just use less water if it were more expensive. And all of our utilities in Alachua County have implemented the tier pricing, which means you pay more the more water you use. But there is a limit, because right now what we're finding is that when that last year is very aggressive and it's a very high price, we have homeowners just sinking an irrigation well, and so now they don't get any feedback from their water use, because they just don't know and they don't get a price point. And we can't really track that groundwater withdrawal anymore. So that to me is probably the worst outcome in terms of water conservation, when they just bypass the utility pricing and sink a well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stacy.
Yeah, so I should have pointed out, the theme of our presentation. Data as a local government, sometimes, you're out and about collecting all this data. How does it inform policy? So I hope that that is evident. So unfortunately, it's not just water conservation that we focus on. We also have water quality problems. This is Alachua County. If you see color or hatching, that is a watershed that's not meeting our water quality standards. Fortunately or unfortunately, Alachua County is not alone. This is pretty much the state of Florida. So we have impaired waters and nutrient pollution from agriculture, urban landscapes, and wastewater, which includes septic systems, is one of the major sources that we're trying to address. As a local government, the strategies that we have, we can lobby for state policies that will reduce agriculture impacts. Due to the Right to Farm Act, as local government, I really can't do anything with agriculture. So it is a big source in the Santa Fe River Basin, but we are focusing on what we can do as local government. So for septic systems, we are considering an ordinance to try to get people to upgrade to systems that treat the nitrogen. Right now, we actually have rebates that we're helping people to upgrade those systems, and we'll see how that goes. Stormwater improvement projects, I mentioned Shane from our staff, so he works on leveraging grant funds and cleaning up some of that nitrogen and phosphorus after it gets into the water. One way that we can keep that water clean is to try to promote resilient landscapes that don't depend on the irrigation and that don't have fertilizer inputs. We do a lot of education, as Eliana mentioned. And then we have our ordinances. And so Ellie kind of talked about some of our irrigation ordinances. I'm going to talk about our fertilizer code. So April 9th, 2019, the best 5 hours of my life, the public hearing to get that adopted. And in that, we summarized findings from the literature. And what came from that is our ordinance that phosphorus is only allowed if a soil or tissue test verifies there's a need, because most of our soils are very rich in phosphorus, and that nitrogen fertilizers can only be used in March, April, May, and June. So not in the rainy season and not in the winter when plant roots are not really sucking up a lot of nitrogen. This was controversial, and I oftentimes hear that Alachua County ignored the science in adopting our ordinance. You can go to the public record and you can see all of the science that we looked at. One of the main studies about nitrate leaching from grasses is a 2012 DEP funded study that happened here at the University of Florida. And it did find that maintenance of healthy turf mitigated nitrate losses when grass wasn't healthy, there was more nitrate losses. And when you really looked into that report, we know as people that do science, rarely do you get like the dream award of unlimited money, funding, students. So most of our studies are limited, right? And we might have, this was our goal. And then oftentimes we publish data and then it gets used for all these other things, like Eliana and I trying to create policy. So some of our concerns with this research was that the field conditions were maintained by turf scientists. As people that are going out looking at yards daily, homeowners are not turf scientists. These are not perfectly maintained yards. It had below average rainfall throughout the study, didn't include typical lawns. It did not simulate over irrigation, which there's lots in the literature that shows that over irrigation is how fertilizers moves and becomes pollution. And as Eliana, I think, showed you, over irrigation is absolutely happening. And it only looked at nitrate, so no other forms of nitrogen. We know nitrogen can shift forms, and it only looked at leaching, not runoff. So it was a great study. And if you read that study, lots of caveats of what they said the results were. But then all of these publications came along, and this is just a snapshot of them that reference that original work. And every time something gets referenced, a little caveat gets lost here and there. And now I get this email into my inbox from FNGLA, the Florida Nursery Growers and Landscape Association, where all the caveats have been lost. So the industry really believes that grass, healthy grass, you can put as much fertilizer on it as you want, and there will be no pollution. I honestly think that that is the message. And then they are, attributing this to UF IFAS, which if you look back to the original work, was not what it was being said. So it's this really challenging situation. How do you now address that when work has, lost some of the context of it, and there's this message out there that is contributing to this nutrient pollution? I will step off my soapbox and come back to talking about our education campaign. So we received $135,000 in a grant to do education, so social marketing, and this happened right about the same time as we did the code change. So we were able to use this money to really develop a campaign asking people not to fertilize and letting people know about our code. And so social marketing, that's the official definition. I like to define it. It's using those traditional tools that got you to go to Starbucks over Dunkin' Donuts and apply it to behaviors with an environmental focus in my line of work. So I'm going to go over some of the steps of social marketing to show you how we designed our campaign. You always have to segment your audience, which is really hard for me, because when I ask, who do I want to do my behavior? I want everyone to do it all the time, right? But it doesn't work that way. We can't just print a pamphlet, give it to people and expect they're going to get behavior change. So we did a pre-survey to learn about our audience, and we learned that 55% don't fertilize, and that's the lighter the color, less fertilizer use. So the darker color kind of coincides with Eliana's high water users are our fertilizer users. So if people aren't using fertilizer, I'm not going to target them with my message. Saves me money. And we learned that there were different audiences with people that lived in an HOA, a homeowners association. They have higher expectations. So with social marketing, we also have to select our specific behavior. It drives me nuts when I see campaigns that say fertilize less, irrigate less, because we have very high opinions of ourselves. Our survey data shows that we think we're doing a great job. That's someone else's problem. So we have to be very specific. So for example, of how we might target that behavior, we learned that people that live in a HOA, that they really care what that front yard looks like. So for them, we tailored the message to don't fertilize in your backyard, which is our yard mullet. So have it be business in the front, party in the back. I will actually attribute this to Wendy Wilbur, if anyone knows her. We market tested this idea. I love this idea. The public hates it. So you are the only one that gets to see the yard mullet. We did focus on that behavior that way, but not with the yard mullet. Maybe one day. We always have to identify barriers and benefits. Why aren't people doing our behavior and what will make them do it? So we learned that what would motivate people is if they believed that it harmed the environment. That only 37% would change their behavior if they knew it was illegal or banned. So we really didn't focus a lot of our campaign on the ban because we realized people don't care. Knowledge was a barrier. A lot of people did not see the connection between fertilizer and our water body. So you'll see in a lot of our campaign, a lot of we were really trying to raise that knowledge, which sometimes knowledge gain does not equal behavior change. So you want to develop using these tools of change. And one thing you can do is norms. We like to be like our peers. So we learned 55% don't fertilize. So we did this join the 55%, that's most people. So it really did this social norming that, it's okay. You won't lose all your friends if you stop fertilizing. It's always good to have incentives. So for a benefit here, we wanted to highlight that you could have healthy springs if you follow this behavior. We could have, future generations would be happy. So we didn't want all of our images to just be this doom and gloom algae. So we had some images that were really positive and highlighting some of the benefits. And your yard can still look great. That was very important to the HOA community. It's really good to have prompts to remind people of the behaviors. Our code does require signage. You should see signage, places that sell fertilizer. Unfortunately, it just says it has to be visible. It doesn't say where it is. We go out and we deliver those once a year. We also have t-shirts, stickers, all these things. We were ready to go at all these farmers markets on the side of town where people fertilize and irrigate. And then COVID happened, but we're slowly getting them out there. We use lots of different communication channels. The Gainesville Sun and the magazine have been really helpful because we've done these like full page ads where we can actually do paragraphs because it's complex. I don't want people to think that fertilizer is our only issue because then I lose credibility, right? When people know that farms are also an issue and septic systems, but I can't put that in a billboard. I can't list all the sources on a billboard. So having different media is really helpful. Social media is king, just return on your dollar if that's where it's at. And we're on different platforms. And we can really do targeting. So for example, backyards are for berries and belly laughs, not fertilizer. This is what we run in like HOA areas. And this is everything we market tested. So we put all these ideas out there into surveys and people gave us feedback. So the yard mullet was rejected, backyard for berries and belly laughs made it through. This is trying to increase that awareness that what you do in your yard can end up harming our springs. We're able to purchase some really great photographs from John Moran, a local photographer. So this is one of those photos. I think we have that on a billboard also. This one I'm just showing you because this was our #1 market tested. People love this idea. And we use humor, right? So the text of this said, okay, we know it doesn't really work exactly like this because there is some roots obviously do pull up some fertilizer. We tried so hard to find a billboard that would let us do this and we could not. So we just used the images. It's really important to evaluate what we're doing. We don't want to just do all of this and then just think that we're doing a great job. So our pre-test survey, we had over 1,000 participants. Our post was almost 2,300. To have a 95% confidence interval in that data, we need about 400 completes. So we did a great job. Our contractor is amazing. Rather than shut the survey, she collects more data and it creates more work for herself, but we get better results. And these were online surveys. So the pre-campaign, 55% said they didn't use fertilizer. It jumped up to 65% after. And then if people reported they saw the campaign, it jumped all the way up to 73. So this is a great problem for me to have. Do I go and like fix all my stickers and t-shirts and join the 65? 40% of respondents who use fertilizer said they decided to use less because of the campaign. A 40% increase in believing that fertilizer can cause algal blooms. So that was one of our goals. So we were happy with that. That is old data. We've done more surveys now as we've continued this, and we're still continuing that trend. So we're really moving that needle. But the most exciting part about this, as someone that does outreach, I am constantly competing for grant money. And for outreach, people want results. They want to know how many pounds of nitrogen are you removing? And once I started working with an engineer, I realized, well, he's just estimating. I can just estimate. So with this campaign, we built into this grant, we hired a consulting company. It was Wood, they're now WSP. And they combined the survey data, spatial data, literature, fertilizer label, all this information. And then they put it into the simple model for surface water and the NSILT for groundwater. So these are the models that are used for determining that map I showed you of all the impaired waters. This is what the state uses for calculating those loads. So we were able to use that and we were able to calculate an estimated 20% reduction in nitrogen loading from, our residential areas, with 8,000 of that in surface water, 12,000 in groundwater. And even more amazing is it's cheap. So that costs about $1 to $8 per pound. $1 is if we just take the creative materials and continue to run with them. $8 is if we continue to pay a contractor to tweak the materials and do more research with it. Compared to the engineering projects, sorry, Shane, but those are $200 to $500 per pound. So it's much cheaper to keep the pollution from getting in the water body than to later have to clean it up. And you might be thinking, okay, a lot of this is based on survey data, there could be some error, but even if I have 50% error and my price goes up to $16 a pound, it's still pretty cost effective. These are our funding partners. We do continue this campaign. We're tweaking it and improving it. And I kind of flew through that because I wanted to leave time for questions for ask Eliana the hard ones, me the fun ones. So.
Right, but let's stay in the room initially for any questions, and then we'll see if we've got some folks online. Any questions in the room? Good.
Yeah, so, for that one house that was using like 1,700 gallons a day. Do you recall if that, like, was there something happening at that site, like a leak or was that like, continued regular use?
Yeah, so that's a good assumption. Sometimes we do have leaks. I would have to, usually when we look at for our incentive programs and our educational outreach, we'll send mailers or invitations to participate in all of these programs to the high water users. And oftentimes we end up drilling down. If I went into the system, I would be able to look at the monthly water use, and that would inform me. So is this like every month, or was there a spike at some point that would indicate a leak? So I would be able to kind of try and go back and find a reason. A lot of times we just have those consistent high water users, like they always use a lot of water every month, even in the summer. And that usually tells us maybe their rainfall shut-off device is not set correctly, their timers are not set correctly. And this is part of doing tune-ups and actually getting the feet on the ground and making those adjustments.
I will say, while you're thinking of your questions, if you found this interesting, you have a session at the Water Symposium in February. Dr. Terrell will be showing his data and Basil will be talking about some case studies. So hope you can come. Yes.
How do you upgrade a septic system for nitrate removal?
Perfect question. How do you upgrade a septic system? So they're called enhanced nitrogen reducing systems. And there's two ways you can do it. You can do an aerobic system where you're using, pumps that you're basically making the nitrogen cycle happen. And that has some challenges because those systems, you have to, the health department comes out once a year to inspect it, and you have to pay a contractor to come out twice a year. So that's a big barrier to a homeowner, that something that's cost you pretty much nothing is now going to have an annual expense and people coming on your property 3 times a year. And then the other option is called an INRB, an in-ground nitrogen reducing biofilter. That just rolls off the tongue. Where basically in the drain field, you're having an aerobic and an anaerobic layer so that you're making the nitrogen cycle happen. Because basically you have to have times where there's oxygen and times where there's not oxygen for the bacteria to do their work and have it go up as nitrogen gas.
So do you put that in as a new system or?
Yeah, so you have to, so if you were doing the one where the drain field, that you have to retrofit your drain field. You can sometimes use your same tank. And then for the aerobic one, it would be, those are out of the box, they're proprietary. So, you can shop online and buy your system. So that would be a new tank. I think you can sometimes use your existing drain field. So costs, I should know this because we're working on the rebate. It's pricey depending on which way. I think my numbers were showing 9,000 to 16,000. And so right now we're offering a 50% rebate up to 5,000 for property owners that do this. around Lake Santa Fe or the Santa Fe River. And I'm about to expand it out a little bit further because so far no one's taken me up on it, so. And that's that balance between voluntary and regulatory programs. Yes.
I have a question. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe like targeting different audiences on different social media platforms? And if you found some platforms to be more effective and why you think so?
Yeah, so definitely it depends. So like for pet waste example, we're now trying to hit a younger audience. And we have a contractor that helps us with this. So what did we end up on? I think we're on Instagram. We tried to be on, forget, there was one platform we were trying to get on, and then the state made it that county employees can't use the platform. TikTok. Yeah, we were like all ready to do TikTok. And then now one more tool taken out of my local government toolbox. So yes, it really depends on your audience. And a lot of our stuff, like we're really focused on yards because that's what's using the water and contributing to fertilizer pollution. So Facebook is a really good one for us because those are us old people. We're on Facebook. But yeah, it definitely depends. And it's always shifting. It's hard to keep your pulse on because I feel like some of the younger generations, you know, they want to be where some of us older folks aren't. So, yeah.
Megan, are there any questions in the
Yeah.
chat?
There is a question on YouTube from Bethany, and she asks, were any of the surveys taken during the COVID pandemic era? How did COVID impact the outreach programs? Were people more or less receptive as they were home more often?
Yeah, so the original data, all of that was pre-COVID. We have done some survey during COVID, and that's an interesting question. I will ask our contractor, you know, because they do surveys for all different people. If anything, I think it would increase our rate of people taking the survey because people were home and bored. It definitely influenced our outreach. Like we wanted to be in all of these like events. We wanted to go to these farmers markets in neighborhoods or parts of town where we know a lot of the irrigators live, but we couldn't do that because of COVID. So it definitely impacted it then. I will say during COVID, we had a really fun social media one. It was very dry in the beginning of the pandemic and water use shot up like crazy because I think people were also home and they were seeing their landscapes more. So people were turning on their irrigation system, and GRU reached out to us and said, hey, can you help us get the word out? Like we're getting close to our permit limit here. And it was really fun because then we had all this dialogue where people were like, it's because everyone's washing their hands. And it was a great time for me to then educate, like, you can wash your hands all day, but if you turn that irrigation system off, you know, you'll really see the difference.
And
So,
also, we're not showering it.
yeah, not showering at the gym.
Is that all online?
Yes.
So I've got two questions.
Yeah.
The first one relates to the fertilizers, and as part of your surveys, do you ever ask what motivates people to fertilize? Like, where are they getting their motivation? Is it coming from either homeowners association, time to fertilize lawn, make everybody nice, you know, or is it because they're just going to the big box store, they see a pile of it and it's cheap or whatever, or are they being, you know, motivated by, let's say, commercial interests that might be pushing it? So from the standpoint of the social marketing, you got your audience that you're trying to influence, but is there another audience that we need to like recognize as potentially the source that's pushing that social marketing in the other direction?
Absolutely. So we don't ask it in that way, but we do ask it in a way that we get at those motivating factors. And a lot of it is HOAs. And that is one of our targets that we're working with that, it's, if you're getting a nasty gram from your homeowner association saying your yard doesn't look good enough, that's more impact than all of the marketing that I can do. So definitely, our big goal is to try to shift that landscaping paradigm that when people say yard of the month, they don't picture this pristine grass that's behind me in this new building. They picture like, something that's more diverse. So yeah.
So a venue there, it's not going to help you in the southwest side where you really have dry retention basins, but if you got wet retention basins, those same HOAs are paying lots of money to try to mitigate for the algal blooms that occur. And so those two things go hand in hand in many respects. Okay, the second question is for you, and this is one where, like, for instance, Nick's data is, how available is that? And I'm very curious about this kind of peer pressure, and you start to get a certain amount of vigilantism where you get certain individuals that say, hey, I met my criteria, but you're the one that's causing all of us to lose our water. So as that information becomes broadly available, is that a potential
So
liability?
HDFA is not available to the general public. It is used in-house by the utility companies, and we have access as water resource managers. And we don't, in fact, like I scrapped all the addresses and all the identifiable information from my presentation because, you know, we don't want to start pointing fingers. Now, there's that website that somebody.
GainesvilleGreen.com still
Yeah.
exists locally.
So, you know, if somebody were really interested to see what their neighbors are doing, they could probably go there and find their parcels, but that, just that information is just available to us. Now, we do use that information when we meet with landscape installers on site, on their properties. And sometimes we're like, you know, like, can we talk about like, why is this house using 60,000 gallons a month and this one 4,000? Like, what's the difference? Sometimes you can't see a visual difference, which is always intriguing, right? And it's super helpful because they manage some of those properties. So when you bring this, like, you know, lot specific information, they start hopefully going back and like trying to find the issues if there's a leak or if the timer is just off. So it's really helpful in that sense.
And we have used that data. We'll create lists of our higher water users, and then like that's who we asked to participate in some of our rebate programs. And sometimes that letter says, you know, you've been identified as a high water user. You know, we don't call them water waster. You know, but GRU is very sensitive, does not want the data to be used for shaming. And there's a whole study of research of how to and not use shame, but motivation to show how good you're doing.
Any other questions? All right, one more round of applause.
Thank you. Very fun, thank you.
Well, thanks very much.
Yeah. Yeah, you too, don't trip there on the.
So as part of your, is there any way to direct those at the, you know, long-term people or the HOA so that they become